Well, good evening and welcome to the Carolyn Holt Show. I am so happy that you joined me tonight. I can't believe it. It is President's Day already. So that means that we're well into the month of February. And as you know, not only is today President's Day, but the whole month of February we celebrate Black History Month. And tonight I want to talk about both things, the current president and Black history. But in reference to the current president, if you would love to join tonight's conversation, you can feel free to do so. And you can call me at area code 323-293-3375 if you'd like to join in tonight's conversation. Again, it's the Carolyn Holt Show, and the telephone number is area code 323-293-3375. Well, this time last year, as you know, there was a possibility that we would have our first female president in Hillary Clinton, because she had determined that she would run for president. And as it turned out, she did win the popular vote. But she lost the election to Donald Trump. And it gets very interesting after that, because I guess the part that has people scratching their head is trying to get an understanding about who our current president really is. I think most people feel that they know, but he keeps insisting upon something else. But since a woman was not elected, it is believed that the part of the voters in America that voted for Donald Trump, they believe, because he was not only an outsider, but because he was a businessman, that this was a great formula in order to, I guess, do the things that they believed him in saying when he said he wanted to make America great again. Well, I don't know how long Mr. Trump has lived in America, but I would say it's most of his life. I think he's in his 70s. And how he could come up with that slogan defies logic and mystifies me, but I'm just one American. But apparently there are those out there who believed him when he said he wanted to make America great again. Well, I don't remember when America did not have the same problems yesteryear that it has today. So I'm not sure what he means when he says he wants to make America great again. We never got an explanation as to what that really meant. And there's a lot of speculation about what that slogan means, making America great again. But what I don't understand is that Mr. Trump had something that most presidents don't get, especially with the first time that they run for public office. And not only run for public office, but run for the highest office in the land. So what he was able to gain as a result of running for the office was he had the House, he had the Senate, he had the quote-unquote Rust Belt, and he had mostly white voters who wanted him to become president because they wanted a businessman and not a politician. But with all of those key factors in place, he still had the nerve to hold a rally in Florida this weekend to campaign. Well, campaign for what? He hasn't done anything yet. So what was he campaigning for? Well, I'm still trying to figure that out. But it is believed and speculated that because he is a businessman and not a politician, that's where the problem comes in. And that's why he was campaigning. Now, some suggest that he's campaigning because he plans to run for president in 2020. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But I think having won the current presidency, it's important that he does the job that he was elected to do now. But according to Philip Bump, who's a writer for the Washington Post, the reason that he held this campaign rally in Florida was to prove that he's winning. Well, in case no one told him, he's won already. And you know, that is kind of scary because here you have the leader of the free world not acting like a winner. Now, on his Celebrity Apprentice show, he would be fired for that. And so I don't understand why the rules and the principles that he had in place on his television show, that he can't seemingly somehow apply those rules to himself. Now, I understand that he's also a very unique president in that he wears his emotions on his sleeve, and he has no problem sharing that with the world. But I think that if he is having problems, and I believe that he is, because it just doesn't make sense to have all of these things in place and still can't figure out what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So I suggest if he does have some issues regarding having become president, there are psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists available. As a matter of fact, I just read an article where they are considering, just like the president has a medical doctor on call at all times, as a result of Donald Trump becoming president, they are thinking of making a psychologist or psychiatrist available to presidents from now on, because they realize that they could have some real mental and emotional issues going on. And most doctors feel that, that's not to be taken lightly. Mental illness and emotional illness is just as much of a concern as a physical illness. So I agree that perhaps they should have one on call, and not just for Mr. Trump, but for anybody in the White House that might be having problems, because it is a very daunting task to be president or to be part of the cabinet, because there's a never-ending slew of problems that are coming your way and challenges that you must meet. And so I understand why it might be necessary from time to time to get some help with that. But Mr. Trump, in having gone to Florida over the weekend to get verification that he's winning, really concerns me. And the reason that it concerns me is, I would say about a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember when Charlie Sheen had the same issue, in that it had become his slogan that he was winning when it was pretty clear that he was failing in life. He he was falling apart at the seams, and I think that maybe some of the same thing is going on, but he made the same declaration. He's winning. So I believe that the president sees himself as the conquering hero, and he wants to be that to everybody, but he has some problems. His inauguration numbers were good, but they were lower than back in 2009. He can't get over the fact that his executive orders on immigration, they almost completely failed and almost turned into an international disaster. And he had some picks for his cabinet that didn't go over so well. So I'm just not sure how he sees winning, but he believes that he is, and that was the reason that he felt he needed to get back on the campaign trail so that he could win again. Well, I say this. Get back to the White House so that you can start doing your job and let the people decide if you're winning. That would be my recommendation. But apparently he's not really interested in what I have to say because he hasn't called me. But if he does, I will deliver that message. But again, today is President's Day, and that's my reflection on our current president. And we're going to go to break, but when we come back, I'm going to talk about Black history in terms of racism, in terms of heritage, and in terms of legacy. So stay with me. I'll be right back.
You're broken down.
Are you looking for an opportunity to earn big money? Math Maze USA is looking for people to train as outside sales consultants. You'll be calling on public and private schools, boys and girls clubs, and the U.S. military. If you're between the age of 18 and 35, a high school graduate with an outgoing personality and great communication skills, we want to hear from you. We offer complete training and great compensation. Call Mr. Glimpse today at 310-753-8830. That's 310-753-8830. Call today.
We gon' say times again.
All right. Thank you for joining me. This is the Carolyn Holt Show. And today, like I said earlier, is President's Day. But we also, in this month, celebrate Black history. And, normally the way that Black history is celebrated is that you get to learn about Black people who have made great contributions to this country, but their names and their contributions are largely unknown. And but what I would like for us to think about it is in a slightly different way tonight. I'd like to think about Black history in terms of the legacy of Black people, the heritage, and how we can take some information that we have been made privy to and implement some of the terms of the information into our daily lives so that things can change. Because America still has a very hard time accepting the fact that racism still exists. And not just for white people. There are Black people who struggle with it daily because they are the victims. And I know that people don't want to hear that because I hear them daily saying, oh, well, why do people always talk about racism? Because that's in the past. Well, it's good to think of it that way, but that's not true. In terms of the battles yet to be fought. There's a lot to do in terms of correcting some of the wrongs of the past. There's a lot to do. And in terms of acknowledging the truth of the matter, there's lots to do. And tonight I want to talk about an article that appeared in the Bloomberg Business Week. Now, if any of you know anything about the finances, you know that Bloomberg is a respected source for financial information. And there's just so many ways that racism has to be fought in order to defeat it and to combat it. So that's why I'm talking about it from the direction of legacy and heritage tonight, and in particular, wealth. Because I think that if the issue of wealth can ever get sorted out, some of the other concerns will fall into place. According to this article that was written by Peter Coy, he says that the gap between blacks and white in income is big, but not nearly as big as the gap in wealth. And when you think about it, income is one thing, but true wealth is something totally different. And according to the Federal Reserve, they did a survey on consumer finances back in 2013. And they determined, now this is the Federal Reserve, they determined that for every $1 that a black person or black families have, the white household has $13 to your $1. So these are just not situations that are being made up to have something to complain and be critical of. There is actual data that support the situation. And it also says that a new study trashes most of the conventional explanations for the wealth gap and the solutions for the wealth gap. The asset value of whiteness, understanding the racial wealth gap, it was done by researchers at another prestigious place, Brandeis University. So the reason I'm naming all of these names is because the point I want to make is many times when the issue of race is brought up, it is often discussed from the position that black people are being victims instead of victors. And I'm here to say that I can say from everything that is in me that that's not true. It's not that black people even see themselves as victims. They're simply explaining and pointing out untruths that get purported and perpetuated as truth. And that's what they're trying to shine a light on. Not that I am a victim. That's not if that were true, that black people only saw themselves as victims, we would not be here because we wouldn't have survived the Middle Passage. So that's not the point. But the point is that not only have we noticed there's a problem, that there are white people who have noticed that there's a problem, and they are pointing it out with research and information, and yet it gets rejected. And that's what's trying to be corrected. So Brandeis University conducted the research, and also a public policy group called demos. And their findings is, not that we didn't know this, but attending college does not close the racial wealth gap. Raising children in a two-parent household does not close the racial wealth gap. Working full-time does not close the racial wealth gap. Spending less does not close the racial wealth gap, because there's regarding spending, there's this big notion out there that African Americans are the leading consumers, and this particular information doesn't support that at all. But it has been said for years. I know I've heard it most of my life that, all we do is, the reason we don't have any money is that we're spending it on clothes and, things that affect our appearance. And not that's not true, but that's not the entire picture. So, according to the research, attending college helps Black people. So it doesn't mean that you should stop going to college. It does help you to attend college. But whites who attend college have 7.2 times the wealth of the median Black adult who attended college. And so when you hear that information, you want to know, well, why? What is the reason for that? Because it shouldn't be such a great disparity. It says also that whites who do the same thing as Blacks, they still have greater income than Blacks. And it is assumed that Blacks doing the above mentioned things have less wealth because they're doing less saving and consuming more. Well, as I said earlier, the research and the data does not support that in terms of us consuming more. And that's a knock against Black people, like I said, that has been the pervasive thought for a long time. And since that's not true, according to this research, we need to examine information about us a little more closely. So, according to Duke University, if we want to improve our financial picture and improve the wealth gap, we should do this. This is according to Duke, which is a very well-respected university. And I don't believe that they're going to risk their reputation on quote-unquote fake news, because you know that these days, anytime there's news that you're not in agreement with, then it's considered fake news. But according to Duke, they say that at every income level, Blacks spend less than similarly situated whites. But because of retail desertification in racially segregated neighborhoods, restricted access to affordable credit for Blacks, and consumer racial discrimination, they argue that this results in lower overall spending for Blacks at all income levels. So doing all the right things and working ourselves to the bone is getting us nowhere. Because the problem in terms of the wealth gap between Black people and white people lies somewhere else. These areas that I mentioned earlier, they are not the reason for the wealth gap. So one wants to know, well, what is the reason? According to this study, whites are 5 times as likely as blacks to receive substantial gifts and inheritances, and the sums that they receive are much larger than black people. That's the number one reason. There are other reasons, but the number one reason that there's such disparity between wealth of black people and wealth of white people is because of substantial gifts and inheritance, and the sums or the amount of the gifts and the inheritance. Now, when you think about it, I know just in terms of my own family that that's true. And the reason I know that's true is because let's just talk about for a moment insurance policies. There is a tendency to not have $100,000 insurance policies or $500,000 or $1 million or $3 million or $5 million or $10 million in most black households. That's not a knock against the household, but that's generally not the amount of the insurance policy in the event of the death of, we'll just say, the parents. If the parents take out these kinds of insurance policies before they pass away, that is generally not the amount that's taken out when it comes to black households. So that's the first area that there's a major difference in, is the insurance policy itself and the amount of the insurance policy. Now, the other major difference is that with these hefty inheritances and insurance policies, along with homes and jewelry and stocks and bonds and a diversified financial portfolio, because that's what makes the wealth, the diversified financial portfolio. There's a lot of money coming from a lot of different places, and while insurance benefits are large, all of these other financial vehicles can be large and a considerable amount of money as well. Now, unfortunately, in many black households, all of those financial vehicles are not in place, but they should be. You should have as many financial vehicles in place as possible if you plan to pass wealth from generation to generation. That's the one thing that you would need to do. Now, according to this survey, the inheritance money that is passed from generation to generation in white families, each generation that receives it, one of the first things that they do with their inheritance is to buy property, because property is still one of the best vehicles and safest vehicles to wealth. So if you leave enough money for generations to be able to purchase property, the good thing about being able to purchase property, especially when you're young, is the equity. And equity is like having cash, but it's in the form of value, because the value of your home and the length of time that you've had it supports how much equity is in the home. And I think I shared with you about a week or so ago how I was talking to a friend of mine, and her neighbor came by, and he was talking about, just in a general conversation, how his equity had afforded him the opportunity to buy whatever kind of house he wanted because he started young and he never took the equity out until he really found what he wanted. And so he was able to make a really large purchase, because I was trying to figure out how are people in Los Angeles buying all of these homes with the amount of money that I think that they have access to. And he said, well, no, they have access to a lot of money, and a lot of it is in the equity in their homes. So keep that in mind, that equity is very important. So according to the survey, when people are able to buy a home and buy it as a young person, this gives them a great financial start. But the other thing that I have to bring up is in Black families where a lot of these vehicles are in place, the one thing that I see that gets jeopardized, though, is the fighting that happens when the parents, will use as in this example, if the parents pass away and they leave a will and they stipulate what is to go to all the heirs. It's amazing the amount of fighting and family consternation that comes up once money is involved. And I think that what we have to learn is that if we're going to have generational wealth, we're going to have to put our greed and misunderstanding of finances aside, because what happens is in situations where there was money left from generation to generation, greed consumed it all, because the relatives that remain are fighting and arguing and carrying on, and the attorneys get all the money because they can't get along, and some of the ugliest situations you want to see is when people pass away and the behavior of the heirs. We have to work on that. Live with whatever Big Mama put in her will, okay? And if Big Mama didn't have a will, and it has to be sorted out in the court system, then go with what the judgment is, so that you don't lose all of your money to really good white attorneys if you want to win, or attorneys of other persuasion. That's just food for thought, because it does not have to be the way. I know several families going through all kinds of turmoil right now because, mom and dad did pass away and they did provide for the heirs, but the heirs aren't happy. So just keep that in mind. They say that, because of the passing down of wealth, this is why there's such a great disparity. But there's some other legal issues that come up. One of them is redlining. And redlining is not a term that you hear a lot about, but trust me, it still exists. And what we're going to say for this show is that even though redlining is a term from the past, it still has legitimacy today. And redlining is where unethical financial institutions make it extremely difficult for certain people in certain areas to gain access to financial services due to perceived high default rates. In other words, Black families, it is perceived that if the least little thing happens, they're going to default on their loans or whatever it is that they may have, And so these vehicles are put in place, but it's very subtle. So you have to, as a person making financial decisions, you have to figure in some of these subtle barriers when you're doing business. The other problem is steering mortgages away, good mortgages away from good people. Now, many times what happens is that even if you have excellent credit, for whatever reason, and we're going to explore the reason in a minute, you are offered what is called a subprime mortgage. And the subprime mortgage does not benefit you. The subprime mortgage benefits the financial institution. And in, 2012, Wells Fargo paid at least $175 million to settle allegations of steering blacks and Latinos into subprime mortgages when whites with the same credit profile received prime mortgage rates. In legal jargon, it's called a racial surtax. Now, Wells Fargo, they never admitted any wrongdoing in this. They never owned up to the fact that this did occur. But we can tell just from the great financial bailout that the banks received when President Obama came into office, that something was going on. And this is what I'm saying about legacy and heritage, because it seems that America still wants to say that it is a figment of the imagination of black folks that racism exists. Well, if you're a bank out, even though you have black and Latino customers, but you can only figure out how to give a prime mortgage rate to white customers, what do you call that if it's not racism? What is that called? Is it that you're blind or something else is going on? I mean, there's no other way for it to be looked at. But it's not only just in the financial arena that this problem exists. It's also in the legal system. It's a well-known thought that if you are young and black and you commit a crime, your life basically is over, especially if you commit a crime as a teenager. There was an article in the Los Angeles Times regarding how young men in particular that are under 13 that have committed crimes, or they knew peers that had committed crimes, how they are coerced into accepting guilt and end up with 25-year sentences when that is not what's supposed to take place for juveniles. There is supposedly a distinct set of rules that's designed to help juveniles. But if the police forces and police departments, in seeing that it's advantageous to solve a case no matter what, and they decide to coerce these young folks into pleading guilty because the young person just thinks, okay, well, if I just say whatever they want me to say, I can get out of jail and I can go home and resume my life. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. That is not what happens. And much of what happens is illegal because young people 13 and under, in many cases, they don't even have legal representation. And so they don't know that they need to be silent until an attorney is present before they start talking. Like I said, their thought is that, well, let me just say yes so I can move on with my life, not understanding that you're saying yes halts your life for the next 25 years. So there's a lot of laws and going-ons that prevent having racism not show itself, but they're not used. What most Americans see is that the laws and the legal system and the financial system and all of these systems are designed to support white America. And that's why the voice gets louder and louder each year about racial matters and how things are not working to the benefit of all Americans in the same way. But I have to applaud. There are some white people out there who are willing to take a look at the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is some of these laws, like the redlining, need to be done away with. Steering mortgages, especially the bad ones, to black people just for the sake of it, that needs to be done away with. And if that continues, then it shouldn't even be up for discussion that racism is the undercurrent for making such a decision, because almost any white person you ask, if you have a candid conversation with them, they never admit to the fact that they are racist or that they are bigots or that they have another agenda. Well, they may not personally. I'm not saying that every white person personally has an agenda, but collectively, when you look at how laws are applied to the two races, there is clearly something wrong. Well, I'm going to go to break, and when I come back, I'm going to talk about some white and black people that have done some remarkable things regarding race. So stay with me.
Are you looking for an opportunity to earn big money? Math Maze USA is looking for people to train as outside sales consultants. You'll be calling on public and private schools, boys and girls clubs, and the U.S. military. If you're between the age of 18 and 35, a high school graduate with an outgoing personality and great communication skills, we want to hear from you. We offer complete training and great compensation. Call Mr. Glimpf today at 310-753-8830. That's 310-753-8830. Call today.
All right. Thank you for joining me. We're talking about Black History Month and the state of race in America. But before I get back to that topic, I just want to say the ad that's running for the job with Math Maze USA, I just want to tell you that that is a real job, and Mr. Glimpf is a wonderful person, and he is a very respectable man who will give you lots of training and support in your endeavor. So please do call him, because that is, I can say personally that it is a real job with really great potential, doing something wonderful in terms of helping students get their math scores up way before they get to high school, so that once they get into high school, they can graduate on time. Because here in the state of California, you not only need to pass at a certain level all of your courses, but you certainly do need to pass math. So please do call him, because that is a legitimate job that I think you'll enjoy doing, because it's very rewarding in that it helps in terms of math. Now, you yourself don't necessarily have to be a great mathematician, but it's the math is taught through the school system. So give him a call, and I think that you'll find the job to be one of the most rewarding that you'll ever do. So check it out. But getting back to race, in terms of moving forward, there are always people out there that do put their faith and their leadership and their stick-to-itness on the line. And one of those people that made a great contribution way back in the 60s, he passed away last year, as a matter of fact, but I found his obituary, and I found it remarkable. I'd never heard of this man, but reading his story really is very interesting. His name is Everett Parker, and when Mr. Parker passed away, he was 103 years old, and he was a member, he was a church official with the United Church of Christ. He was white, and his goal and desire was to help fight the racism that was pervasive at the time with television stations. And one of the stations was an NBC affiliate in Jackson, Mississippi, WLST. And apparently WLST had a practice of, when the guest would come to the station and the guest was black, it would put up a sign during the interview portion and say that the station was having cable trouble, and they would just take the signal off, and people could never hear what black people had to say when they went to this particular station. So Mr. Everett, he was not in agreement with this practice because, as you know, or you may not know, any broadcast station, they have to operate in the public's interest, convenience, and necessity. That's one of the first things you learn if you have a degree in communication. And so in order to get a license, that's what you're supposed to do, is operate in the public's interest, convenience, and necessity. And this particular station, not only this one, there were a lot of other stations doing the same thing, but he chose this one in particular because they had the nerve to repeatedly do this. They didn't just do it one time and stop, but this was a common practice at this station. And Mr. Everett was not happy, and he received a call from Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King asked him to help to put an end to this practice. And he did. But Mr. Everett was considered a rebel, I guess, because being affiliated with such a huge organization as the United Church of Christ, it was expected that his goal in life was to do the business of the church. And that was not his feeling about it at all. He said even though he had a position in the church and he had a desire to do the work of God, his mission was to serve humanity and not just operate in the interests of a broadcast station. So I applaud Mr. Everett Parker because often there are people out there fighting in the trenches, trying to do away with age-old standards that have been put in place, and you don't know their name, and often you don't know their name until they pass away. And unfortunately, Mr. Parker did pass away, but while he was living, he fought the good fight for to make sure that black people could be shown on a local television station. And the problem many times is with affiliates is that they are associated with a major network, but they have their own operating techniques that they use, and sometimes it doesn't line up with the parent company, so to speak, which at this time was NBC, and that can cause a problem. So I applaud Mr. Parker. Another person I have to applaud is Jim Grimsley. And Mr. Grimsley acknowledged that he was a racist, and that's not an easy thing to do. But he said that racism is part of us from cradle to grave. And he's an author, and he said that he has been at book signings where people come up to him when he's talking about himself and how other white people have been racist, and they come up to him and say, "Oh, it's a shame about those other people," but his writing is about pointing out the fact that it's not the other people; it's generally the person talking that has issues with race, and he's made it his mission in life is to keep pointing out the fact that it's not the other person. You need to take a look at yourself. And so I applaud him because I think that's the only way we will ever eradicate the issue of racism, which most black people don't understand because we are not immigrants to this country. We were brought here. So we don't get why there's such animosity toward us when we are somebody that you selected. So we need a much better understanding as to why we are so disliked for no apparent reason. And for young black people, what I want to say is this. This is truly, racism is truly a situation where you need to keep your head up, because much of what you create is always used and presented by others, including white people, as their own. Because of your creativity, you have done so much. But the thing to keep in mind is that creativity is a very lucrative business, and you need to be paid for the things that you create. Don't just allow people to dismiss your creativity as rigging things up or just wasting time. There's a man here in Los Angeles that lives by the freeway. Every day you go by there, he's created something. Now, it may not look like much, but if it solves a problem, then people will say, "Oh, well, I saw him, but I took this idea and made money off of it, even though somebody else presented it. So just keep in mind that there's always someone out there trying to take money out of your pocket. So own your creativity and learn how to monetize it to your advantage. Racism is a problem that is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And so my challenge to you is to not let it destroy you or get you down. You've come too far to turn around. So keep your head up. And as always, on this show, it's about moving you from misery to magnificence and from subpar to spectacular. Remember that and do all you can to eradicate racism. God bless you and good night.
Opportunity to earn big money. Math Maze USA is looking for people to train as outside sales consultants. You'll be calling on public and private schools, boys and girls clubs, and the U.S. military. If you're between the age of 18 and 35, a high school graduate with an outgoing personality and great communication skills, we want to hear from you. We offer complete training and great compensation. Call Mr. Glimpse today at 310-753-8830. That's 310-753-8830. Call today.
Keep your head